Welcome back to Prof E Plays. And in this episode, I want to do something a little bit different than what I have been doing recently. So rather than doing an actual play, I want to give some thoughts related to RPG related ideas. In particular, one thing I've been thinking about recently has been experience. And I don't mean like my experience as a player, but rather character experience and advancement and the like. And the way that different games handle this, because I just find that interesting to see how character advancement happens over the course of a game. Right, so there are some games like Cepheus Universal in particular, where there isn't actually an explicit advancement system. So advancement in that game is designed to happen kind of in the world, right? So you develop contacts, you acquire things, that kind of thing. You don't actually like in yourself see your skills improve, for example. At least there's nothing automatically built into that system. Now, if you play some other versions of Cepheus, there is kind of a way to do that, though it takes significant downtime. Is really the way that works. So I'm going to set that aside, where it's you purely kind of in-game advancement, but have something where there is some kind of experience points or something along those lines that then advances your character mechanically. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a class of games which are level-based games. Right. So the idea here is that you're acquiring experience points. Once you hit certain experience point thresholds, then you level up your character. So the first one I want to talk about this is not the most famous one, but is based on it. Right. So it was my first role-playing game that I played when I was in college. Right. That my now wife got me into. Right. So Star Wars. Right, the role-playing game. This was back when it was Wizards of the Coast that had the rights to this, so it's a very different system that you'll find now if you play the Star Wars related games more recently. Um, and so in this one, it's very, very similar to Dungeons and Dragons, specifically like the 3.5 or so. It's kind of built on that engine, and experience works very much the same way, right? So we know that in this game, very much like in, I have here my copy of 2014 Player's Handbook. Right. So we know that in these games, the way that experience works, right, is that you kill stuff, right, and then you get experience points. And once you hit these experience thresholds, then you cross over, right, a some point at which then suddenly you're much better at a bunch of things, right? So it could be anything from normally you'll have things like your whatever your attack bonus is based on may go up on a fairly regular basis. Your number of hit points almost always is going to go up as you level up, and then perhaps some other abilities also increase. Again, depending on the specifics of the game. Now, both of these particular games do quite a bit with each level, right? So you are acquiring new abilities of whatever kind, whether it be, say, new feats or right upping your abilities that are game related all the time. But the key thing that I think about here with these, well, there are a lot of leveling kind of games that work that way in terms of advancement. How you get experience in these games, at least in kind of the default rules, would be killing stuff. That's really what it is. It's defeating enemies is what moves you forward. Now, there are other level-based games, though, that use different experience frameworks. So this one, Scarlet Heroes, was one I have here. My wife, I believe, kickstarted this, if I recall correctly. So then gave it to me as a gift. Um, so I just had the PDF, so I printed it out. That's a theme on my channel, right? So this game, one of the issues when you play a game that is solo is making judgment calls about experience, right? And that's something that different systems ask you to do or not to do, depending on the case, right? So, for example, like you do have, say, as a DM, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, it may be true that killing stuff, get the XP for killing it, is the default, but there are also these alternative systems which really involve more DM judgment. Uh, Scarlet Heroes says, no, this is what we're going to do. You get one experience point every session, period. That's it. Right? And that makes it very simple then as a soloist so that you know that you're not cheating, right? Whatever that means. It's hard to cheat when there's no victim, but you're not cheating the system, right, by advancing too quickly or anything like that. It's just one level per session. Very, very simple, easy to implement, and then once you hit the thresholds, you level up. Right. So, and leveling up here is very similar to leveling up in something like a Dungeons and Dragons or the D20 Star Wars when WotC had those rights. Very, very similar. Um, System itself is a little bit simpler, so there aren't quite as many moving parts that might increase, but it's the same basic concept. Also within that, another one that does something similar would be Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? So this one, again, hit those experience thresholds, you level up. That is going to advance things like your attack bonuses and the like. But a big difference here, and something I really like about the system, and if you've seen me play it, uh, like you've seen this in action, right? While Dungeons and Dragons and things in that ilk give you experience points for success, Dungeon Crawl Classics gives you experience points for failure, which I really like that idea that what gives you experience is not having things go well. Right. Right. So, okay, things were really bad, right? People died or got seriously injured. That is going to lead to us learning things, right? Is kind of the philosophy of something like a Dungeon Crawl Classics. So I really like that. Whereas in Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you go into a battle and everything just goes swimmingly, so you don't even have to like spend any luck points or anything like that, there's no experience points. It was too easy. You really didn't learn anything from the experience. So I kind of like that philosophy. But in terms of mechanics of it, it's very, very similar to what you're going to find in these other games that I just mentioned. One more in that would be so I don't actually have a proper cover because all I have, you've been watching me play this probably if you watch my channel, Shadow Dark. Right? So this is the part of the, um, I believe it's the player's guide from the quick start that I printed out. Oh no, I think this is actually GM's guide, but whatever it is. Um, So this game also, right, uses that leveling kind of system, very much like all these other games that I've mentioned already. The difference here would be how you get your experience points, right? So while we have kill-in stuff, sessions, and failure, right, this is a treasure-based system. So there, as far as I can tell, right, um, I'm not as experienced with Shadow Dark as I'm sure many people are, but you really get experience points two ways primarily, right? And that is one, you get treasure, two, you spend treasure, right? So it's basically that, right? So take your treasure, cash it in, take that cash, do carousing, and that gets you more experience points. Now, it's certainly there are mentions, right, within even within the quick start of giving experience points for other things, right? So things like, oh, where you defeated a trap and you're a thief. You should probably get some experience for that. You had a really clever plan or something that you should get some experience for that. These types of things get mentioned, but fundamentally, it's really primarily going to be treasure based, one way or the other. Okay, so that's one class. All of these fall into that leveling kind of system. Now, there are other games out there, though, that don't go so cleanly by levels. So I want to talk about some of these. So here's one. Now, most of these have the basic structure of you have skills, and those skills are going to level up. In effect, you use experience points as a currency, and then you spend that currency to level things up. So this would be one of the earlier games that I played with this type of style to it. So this is Hunter the Reckoning. This is the version that came out in the very early 2000s, or maybe even late 90s. I don't know. I didn't run across it until the very early 2000s. So this was the game that I spent a lot of time GMing in college. Right, so this one, in terms of earning experience, this came from at the time was White Wolf. I think White Wolf might still exist. I'm not sure. The Hunter the Reckoning game, the latest edition of it, I believe, is produced by Renegade Game Studios. They made some significant changes to how the world works, but but the system, I think, while tweaked, is fundamentally very similar, a dice pool based system. In terms of experience, what happens with these games, they kind of in the world of mechanics and kind of what games should be, White Wolf's World of Darkness tried to be more narrative than what you're going to find in, say, a Dungeons and Dragons, and they reflected that then in their experience basis, in their experience point system, and that you had a number of points that you could earn every session. You get one automatically just for showing up. But then if you had good role playing, right, so you really played your character well, right, then you get a point for that. If you took risks or something like that, you get another point for that. Right, so I think it was something like a total of you get 3 or 4 points a session at most. More typically, I found in my experience, both running and also playing as a player, about 2 points a session was pretty common. And then as you acquire these, you can take them and spend them to increase the level of your skills. And so that's a game there. Now, so that's one way of doing this. So you just get experience points, right? Sessions, role playing, whatever. That's one method. Another I have here, right? So this is my this Ironsworn Delve. I don't actually have the core Ironsworn book, not physically. I have a PDF of it. So this one, Ironsworn uses a goal-based experience point system, right? So as you complete goals, and this is something they also kept in Starforged. Starforged broadened it out a little bit. I'll talk about that in just a minute when I follow this one. But as you complete goals, you get experience points. These experience points, very much like in, say, something like a Hunter of the Reckoning, that you then spend, right, to increase your abilities to get bonuses and the like, right? So it's very similar to what you'd find in something like a Hunter of the Reckoning. Now, Ironsworn and Starforged still within that Iron Sworn category. In this case, they've just broadened the types of goals you might be achieving. So it could be vows you've sworn, kind of traditional story adventure kind of goals, but it could also be things like making discoveries, right, or building relationships. All of these are ways of getting experience points, which then again you're spending to get bonuses and the like, and other abilities. Right, so we have these types of things. There's also another class, right, your monster of the week. Right, so monster of the week has a system where you get experience points for failure, which in some ways is very much like the DCC system, but this is combining this with something closer, right, to a skill-based system. And while you don't have skills quite the same way as you do in some of these other games, nonetheless you're unlocking abilities, right, as you gather experience points from failure. Right, so that's a method. There's another class of games here, right, which D100 Dungeon fits in, as does basic role playing, and I guess games under the basic role playing umbrella would fit this as well. Right, so these would be what I would consider to be experience from use games. Now, exactly how it works depends on the specifics. So in D100 Dungeon, right, anytime you use a particular skill, if you roll a very good success, it's a D100 based system. You can probably guess from the name, right? It's a roll under. So if you roll low enough, specifically if you roll 10 or under, right, then you get experience for that specific skill or attribute that you used. So this is something that's much more specific. A basic role playing is very similar in that if you use a skill and you use it successfully, then you put a check mark by it. At the end of the adventure, you roll any of the skills that you used to see if you made some experience advancement, right, for that particular skill. So that's an interesting system. Again, it's a D100 system under basic role playing. So you have to roll under in order to succeed. But then once you have that experience check, right, which tells you you have to roll for experience at the end, you have to roll above your experience level. So the idea is fairly straightforward in that the higher your experience level is, the more likely you are to succeed in the first place, but the less likely you are to advance, right? So if you're at a low level, there's a lot you can learn, is the idea. So you're going to advance more quickly. If you're at a high level, it's very difficult for you to advance from that point. Right. And that's something like that particular trait is something that you don't quite have in D100 Dungeon. It's always that 1 to 10 is going to advance things, right? But they nonetheless have the same kind of idea in that it is using the thing that pushes it forward. And then want to talk about just one last one to wrap up. It's a different kind of system, right? Star Trek Adventures. This one, like I have Captain's Log, which is the solo version of this game. I also have, I think it's the previous edition. I have PDFs of like the entire thing because there was a good deal on Humble Bundle. Okay. In any case, right. So this system, right, I want to talk about this because I think it brings up the question of what advancement or development really means. Because most of these games, what happens is that if you were to play the game eternally, right, you would just get better and better and better and better at everything. So, like, technically, it is in fact possible playing D100 Dungeon, right, that you would actually max out all of your stats and then just almost never fail, except if you happen to roll what would be an automatic failure. That is something that is possible, technically, right? So that means that, and you see that in a lot of these systems, whether it be you keep leveling up, and it's true, like in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, once you level up to a certain level, it becomes hard to level up to the next level because they increase the XP threshold quite high and by large steps once you get to upper levels. But nonetheless, you play forever, you're going to get more and more powerful until you are effectively a god, right? But Star Trek Adventures does not do that, right? Instead, it uses a milestone-based system where there's been some kind of significant event in your character's life, and the way that your character develops is not actually by getting any better, right? Instead, your character shifts, right? What's its whatever their abilities are, right? So it may be that I was previously really good at, I don't know, fitness or something like that, but now I'm going to be more good at, I don't know, diplomacy or something along these lines. Let me see the exact number, the exact skills. Okay, so maybe I move from fitness to presence. Right, right. So it's a shifting. So I take a point from one area and move it to another area. I take a point from one area, move it to another area. I take away a specialty and then put in a specialty, a different specialty. Right. So in this case, we can really think of this as um, your limitations are built in. Now, a nice thing about this kind of system, now with a solo game like Captain's Log, it really doesn't matter. But if you're playing Star Trek Adventures in a group, this solves one of the problems that a lot of systems have, and that is how do you introduce a new player? This is an enormous problem if you're playing a leveled game in particular, right? So I just imagine, say, what if I'm running a Shadow Dark campaign, right? For my friends, and they have invested a lot of time in their characters. They're reasonably high level, and maybe not extremely high level, maybe even like level 4, right? And then I have another friend. I think, oh, they seem like they might be interested, so I ask if they want to play. They say yes. Now, what do I do? Like, do I have them create a level 4 character? In which case, right, they're going to have a problem, especially if they're new to the game, because they don't have the experience that their character does. Now, naturally, you can get around this. None of us technically have the experience your characters do. That's obviously the case. But you don't know how to use those abilities, so piling on lots of abilities can be a problem. Now, Shadow Dark, that's less a problem because there are fewer abilities, but something like taking a new person, throwing them into Dungeons and Dragons at 5th level is almost cruel. Uh, at least for certain classes, because there are just so many moving parts. Keeping track of them can be very difficult. I have a hard time keeping track of a D&D character, even at lower levels than that. I forget what some of my abilities are or when they recharge or these kinds of things, right? So that creates an issue. So if I have a new player, or you want to keep things simple for them, you don't want things to be outrageously out of balance. They're just kind of tagging along with the rest of the group, right? So what do you do? And that's something you have to think about. So how do we account for the fact that the player may be better off if they're new having a fresh character at a low level so they can gradually advance and build that character to be what they want versus having them be a tag along. How do we balance that? And that's something, there are all kinds of strategies. I don't have great insights on that, but it's a challenge that you need to face. But notice this is not a challenge in Star Trek Adventures because in terms of raw level, everybody's the same. Right? It's just that if you've been around a while, you have tweaked your character, right? So you've moved around what their stats are. But in terms of total ability, it's really the same as everybody else. It might possibly be, right, that you can get a little bit more specialized with an older character than with a younger character. A younger character, the design of this forces you to have a certain level of balance, right? But everyone might be the more experienced characters. As you make those steps with advancement, you don't necessarily have the same restrictions. Nonetheless, total ability, Okay, so became really awesome at one thing, but you did that by becoming really awful at a couple others. That's going to be reasonably well balanced with a totally new character. So, in terms of character balance within the party, something like this, right, is actually pretty good as far as that goes. At the same time, like as a player, it can be kind of frustrating to say, well, I'm not really getting better, I'm just getting different. And that, like, for a while, that can be okay as you kind of figure out the character and the kinds of things they actually do versus what you thought they might do. So, the ability to tweak your stats that way is helpful. But eventually you hit the point where it tends to feel things might possibly become stale. Of course, that's also where I'd say, well, some games aren't designed for you to get the thrill just from having new powers all the time. I mean, that's just true. Right? I mean, when if I sit and I watch, say, Star Trek: The Original Series, the reality is that very little character development, right, happened in like within that series. Actually, I think a lot more happened in the movies after the series, to be perfectly honest. Right? But every week you tune in, right, to watch Kirk, Spock, and Bones do their thing, and it's going to be basically the same, right? They're very similar, right, from week to week. That changed a little bit when we got to some of the later series. We do see much more character development in something like Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine. Um, and you certainly see radical changes in how characters work in a show like Discovery. But nonetheless, we don't see like very often we don't see characters moving from right. I'm a total like neophyte noob, right, into becoming a god. Not that that never happens, watch enough Star Trek, you see people become gods, right? But it's a very rare thing, right? For the most part, in terms of power level, you're staying very similar. Your values and views might change, which is really what a lot of this game is about, is how your values and views are changing over time. Right? But it's not really about, oh, now I'm a better at shooting my phaser or I'm better at doing engineering or something like that. Very little of the show is about that, and therefore very little of the game is about that. I mean, I'd already mentioned, for example, something like Cepheus, where, like, in terms of mechanics, basically nothing, right, changes over the course of that game, or it changes extremely slowly, which, again, that's just that style, which is perfectly fine. But in any case, I like to lay this out there because this is something I've been thinking about specifically as I've been playing more Shadow Dark on this channel. Right, so feel free to tune in. I have playlists for that. Um, but as I've been thinking about this, I'm thinking about what I do and don't like. Right, so let me take a minute here to talk about what I do and don't like in terms of experience systems. And so one, what do I like about something like a Scarlet Heroes? I love the simplicity of that. One session, one experience point, very clear. You know how things are going to advance over time, right? So I need 10 experience points to get to the next level. Well, I play 10 sessions, I'm there. I need another 20. Well, then 20 more sessions, I'm there at the next level. It's very straightforward, right? Very predictable, which can be very beneficial if you want to think in terms of long-term planning for your character. But at the same time, I don't know that I like the logic of it that well. Because while it is certainly true, right, that I have new experiences every day that I think develop me as a person, nonetheless, right, it's not simply a function of time, right? There are things that make me significantly better at the things that I'm doing over time because of specific types of experiences. And that's where I think that I I, I really do like the DCC philosophy, which you also find, right, the same kind of philosophy in Monster of the Week as an example, where failure provides a learning opportunity. And that is what pushes you forward. I really like that system. Uh, whereas I've also learned playing Shadow Dark, the treasure-based system, it does not jive with me that well. I think probably in part, like one, I find it easy to forget just because it's not what I'm used to. It's not what I grew up with. And I didn't grow up playing role playing games. It was till college that I learned about them really, apart from just knowing the name Dungeons and Dragons existed. So So it's easy for me to forget. That's a point against it, just for me personally, right? Not necessarily for anybody else. But it just feels weird to me, right? Why is it that, picking up some gold coins, right, suddenly means that now I'm a better fighter? That feels strange to me, right? On the other hand, right, I can also see, right, value in things like the D100 dungeon basic role playing method of I use the skill successfully. That shows that I'm developing that skill. I can find that plausible, right? So I think that you can tell a story for a lot of these systems. Although I'm finding, I guess I like to sometimes play the game of if I were to sit down and write my own role playing game, what would it be like? So, what kind of experience system would I choose? And I think, like one, I honestly, I think I would go the DCC path. I really think I would. That it's loss. It's that sense of loss that leads you to improve. I like that idea. Right? So the use of resources, whatever that happens to be, might be hit points or luck points, it might be characters dying, right? All of these are things that would lead to experience, which in turn leads your characters to improve. I like that. I like that concept. And so I would probably be very tempted to go that way. Um, the other thing that I'd be tempted by would be that usage based system of like the D100 dungeon basic role playing. I'd be tempted by that as well. Uh, Now, are these necessarily mechanically satisfying? Maybe, maybe not, right? But nonetheless, I think that that is the direction I personally would choose to go myself. In any case, uh, I hope that this was in some way informative, possibly even interesting. I don't know. Uh, but thinking about experience points and how they work and how they help you develop characters, uh, I think it's worth some thought, and is something that might possibly, right, as you gain more experience, right, it could actually guide the types of games you want to run and how you run those games or play those games. Right. Well, I think that's enough rambling for me for now. So this is Prof E signing off.